Good evening and welcome to Alan's Italy. You know, people often come up to me and say, what is your favorite place in Italy? Which is a really difficult question for me, and a question that I'm reluctant to answer. And I indicate that to them, and they usually say something like, well, give me your top three. So I do that. I say, well, I like going to Florence because we get to visit friends and their family and their families, and we get to experience some really wonderful food and some great museums. And while we're in Florence, we usually travel around Tuscany, so that's really great. And we like going to Venice because Venice is just a very exciting and beautiful place. When the Biennale is in town, which is every odd year, it's really a very, very exciting place to be. And then we also like to go to the town of Varenna on Lake Como because it's just a very relaxing, kind of laid-back place. In fact, that is the trip that I have planned for us that we're going to be embarking on Tuesday. So let me go to that album. First of all, the show is number 111, my favorite street in Rome. I'll get to that a little later, Via dei Fori Imperiali. There's a whole story behind how I chose that. But this is the trip that we will be taking starting next Tuesday. We're actually flying into Zurich, Switzerland, where we're going to switch plane. We're not going to stay in Switzerland for very long. We're leaving a couple of hours later and taking a very short plane ride of about an hour from Zurich to Florence. We're landing for the very first time that I've been to Florence probably 21 times, but I've never flown directly into it. So this is going to be a unique experience. And that should be very, very nice to be able to just get to your hotel in a very short time. we're going to be there 5 days and then take a train to Venice and stay in Venice for 4 nights and see the Biennale and stay at a hotel that I've never stayed in before. And, if that works out really well, that's going to be a future show. And then we're going to take the train to Milan, where we switch trains to Varenna on Lake Como. And that's going to be the trip that we will take. Hopefully, again, I will bring back some really interesting stuff for my viewing audience. So once again, let's talk about how I came to investigate and present a show on a street in Rome by the name of Via dei Fori Imperiali. And my audience knows that I am just very, very into streets in Italy. And I did a show called My Favorite Streets in Italy, Part 1, Via della Scala in Florence. And, this show was done at a time before I actually was numbering them, I think. So there's no number on this for some reason, but this was the show that I did. And then I did a show on Italian streets and roads, which was show number 66. The street you're looking at, in fact, is a street in Pompeii. So that's a 2,000-year-old street that you're looking at. But I'm very, very into streets, and I'm very into Italian streets in Rome. And in fact, I did a show called My Favorite Streets in Florence, which was show number 91. And that's the street you're looking at there is one of the Langarni, which are the streets that run alongside the Arno River. So, I'm just very into streets. And this is, I like, when you go to a town, one of the great experiences is to not run in and out of museums and churches. And, of course, we love restaurants, but, during the day, you're not going to be doing that. But I just like to just kind of, in a leisurely way, walk down a very interesting street. And some of the streets I'm going to show you now, and that's one of them right there. And that's the street that goes across the Ponte Vecchio that I actually was highlighting on the previous show that we did shopping, because, you have the jewelry stores. This is another street that I was highlighting. This is the Via Turnabone, which is also, as you could see, a traffic-free street with the fancy stores along the side. This is the Via Calzaiuolo, which is, obviously I'm focusing on pedestrian-only streets, so, that's always nice. You don't have to watch out for cars coming at you. And this is a great street in Florence as well. The Via della Scala, which is not pedestrian-only. In fact, it's probably one of the most dangerous streets that I've ever been on, because the traffic comes down that street very quickly. And you can see that there's a pedestrian crossing right in the front of that photo, which a lot of cars don't pay any attention to. So they'll plow you down just as well. So, but that's one of my favorite streets because my favorite hotel is on it, one of my favorite restaurants is on it, Lydia's store, Gioia Chiara, is on it. So, the streets of Rome. So how did I come up with this idea? Well, number one, I'm into streets. Number two, I began to put together a show on the streets of Rome. And in that regard, what I do is I set up an album, go through all my photos that I have on Rome, and, I start to work in my mind how I'd like the show to progress over the course of the 40 to 55 minutes that a typical show is. And I was going through some of the streets in Rome. And this is some of them. And, the streets in Rome are, in my opinion, very different from the streets in Florence. Usually the streets are pretty wide. They don't have to be. And you'll see in a few minutes that some of them are really narrow, charming streets, as you would find in any Tuscan village. But this is one of the major streets in Rome. And there's a much smaller street, as you could see. Very pretty. Very nice to walk along the streets in Rome, especially because it's always so crowded and frenetic in Rome that this is a chance to really slow up And here's a typical street, which is usually has a lot of traffic. You could see all the parked cars on the left and on the right side of that street. This is a street that's behind the Roman Forum. The name of the street is the Via Teatro di Pompeo. No, that's not the name of the street. The name of the street is Via Teatro Marcello. And that's the name of that. It takes its name from, all right, well, that's a different street. I'll come back to that in a few moments, but that's the street. That's where the street takes its name. This is the Teatro, the Theater of Marcellus, to use the English. And this is a theater that was created by Augustus, the Emperor Augustus, for his nephew, who died at a very young age. And you can see the bottom part of that structure is the Theater of Marcellus. The top part of that, actually the entire structure, was made into a very, very fancy modern apartment building. And the apartments are for sale in this building, and they're very, very expensive. So they took this ancient structure and created this really marvelous, condominium, building, and it's really amazing. So that's where the street gets its name. Then going back here, this is a very, very popular street in Rome that runs alongside of a very well-known excavation site that I'll discuss in just a moment. You can see that everything is happening on this street. You have the tram on the left side, you have the motorcycle, you have cars along there. And, and then after being on a major street like that with all the cars and so on, you then come to a street like this, which is a really delightful street to walk down. And this is a big street in Rome. This is the Via Sistina, which runs from the Piazza Barberini all the way down. You can see it's going down, and then it then comes up, and it actually comes up at the very top of the Spanish Steps. So it's a really interesting street that goes a pretty long distance. That's about a mile from the top of that street. And if you look back, which is not in the photograph, you come to the Piazza Barberini, which is a major piazza. This is the street that runs alongside of the excavation site, and that's another view of the excavation site is actually on the left side. You can see that there's the wires overhead for the trams, and this is the excavation site, which is one of my favorite. And this is it's called Largo Argentina, and it was a site that they didn't know about until relatively recently, and it is being excavated and I've actually watched as the archaeologists were excavating this site, so it's really quite amazing. And it also has become a cat sanctuary. There are literally hundreds and hundreds of cats. I'll tell you where they're located. They're located in the back, going kind of into the photograph, towards the back of the photograph. There are literally hundreds of cats, and people come and feed the cats. So it's kind of like a recognized cat sanctuary. It's very interesting. So you get the cats and you get the excavators, and you get this beautiful site, and it's really something else. And again, I'm intermixing the very narrow, very interesting, charming streets with the very large one. This is a street in Rome that connects, let me see where this is going from. I believe it's going from the Piazza dello Rotondo, which is the piazza that the Pantheon is located, and it cuts all the way through to that area where Largo Argentina is. And you get everything here. You get people walking, as you could see, balloons, there's restaurants, there's stores, and you see there's a musician right there in the front playing what looks a little like a sitar, but it's not. I believe we asked him what that was. It's an African instrument, and he was there, playing music. And this is what you get in Rome on a Sunday afternoon usually, but also on other days as well. But it's very active on Sunday because everybody's off and kind of walking around. And I'm showing you this. This is the Piazza de España, and this picture was taken from the top of the Spanish Steps. But the reason I'm showing you this photograph is because the street you could see straight ahead, right down the steps, and then straight ahead is the Via Condotti, which is one of the most famous shopping streets in all of Rome, and that's a very interesting street as well. This is a beautiful street with, as you can see, a restaurant over there on the right, and what looks like another restaurant or cafe on the left, and there's trees, and this is a very, very pretty street. And this is the street that the hotel that we stay in Rome is located. It's the Via Modena, and it's in the center of Rome. It's a very busy street, and this picture was actually taken from the hotel room of the hotel. And this is the street, as you can see right there in the foreground, that runs alongside the Tiber River. So this is a very nice street to walk along, because as you walk along it, you get to see, this very cool and refreshing waterway that runs through the center of Rome. This street is located in that same area where the Jewish ghetto is located in Rome. And now back to the actual show. So I was putting together this show on the streets of Rome, and came to the conclusion that I wanted to focus on one particular street. It's called the Via dei Fori Imperiali, and translated into English, that is the street of the Imperial Forums. And I'll tell you what that means as we progress through this. There's a placard that's on the street. This is not an ancient placard, because obviously it's in Italian, and that would be in Latin. So I don't think it's. And of course, the name of this street was not actually given that name until after World War II. I'll get to that in just a moment. But of course, there's the Coliseum, which is one of the most famous sites in Rome that a lot of people go to, as you could see. And at the other end of the street is this palazzo. This is the Palazzo Venezia. And you could see that there is a balcony straight ahead. Let me point that out in case you're having trouble. Right here is a window that opens up and allows people to come out to the balcony. And that is probably one of the most famous balconies in Italy, because that's the balcony that Mussolini stood at when he wanted to address the people of Rome. And there is a picture of Mussolini standing on the balcony of the Palazzo Venezia. Okay, so picture that. And this is, he's speaking to a very large number of people. This is actually a better photo in that regard. This is a good photo because you could see, what the balcony looks like in relation to the palazzo. But this is what it looked like. Back in the 1920s, there's Mussolini on the left side, and the literally hundreds of thousands of people that he was addressing. And he liked to do this. It was very important for his ego. And he came to the conclusion that he would like to create a street. So there was no street at this time connecting the Coliseum, which you could see there on the lower right-hand portion, to the Palazzo Venezia, which is in the upper left-hand portion. You could see the letters EZIA, and that's that was cut off. That was the letters for what was referred to as the Palazzo Venezia. So he wanted to create a street that would go from the Coliseum to the Palazzo Venezia, and he would indeed either ride on a horse or ride in a cavalcade of automobiles with him in the lead, waving to the people right in this vicinity. Okay, and you could see there that this is in a very, very important location, because to the left of the street is the Roman Forum and the Palatine Hill and the Campidoglio, and to the right are some of the streets in Rome. One of them, one of the landmarks I could tell you, is the very famous um, Church of San Pietro in Vincoli, which is where there are several sculptures by Michelangelo, namely his Moses and Leah and Rachel. So this is a really central location, and he decided to build this street. The problem is that along that street, at the time that he wanted to build it, which was in the early 20s, there were what was known as the imperial forums. Now there's the Roman Forum is right down here at the bottom. You can't see it, it's out of the picture, but it's right over here, the Roman Forum. And that was, of course, goes back to hundreds of years BC, but all of the emperors that came after that decided that when they became emperor, they wanted to create a forum in their name. So you could see some of the forum right there. You could see the forum of Augustus. You could see the forum, which is called Traiani, which is the forum of Trajan, and the forum of Augustus and the forum of Julius Caesar. But unfortunately, from Mussolini's point of view, all of these forum were in the way of the street that he wanted to build. And this is what all the forum were. There were 13 different historical sites that were on that spot. And you could see the list of them there. The Temple of Trajan, the Column of Trajan, the Forum of Trajan, the Market of Trajan, the Temple of Venus, the temples of Caesar, of Augustus, of Mars, and so on. And indeed, this is what would happen. So these are all the forums, and the street would actually cut right through it. So he wanted to actually create a street that would plow right through all of these historical sites. And, at the time, he was the dictator of Italy, and he could pretty much do whatever he wanted. Now, nobody would be able to do anything like that. And I'll tell you a very interesting story at the very end of the show. But that's what the street would be going through. You could see the streets and the forums were kind of superimposed upon that, and you could see that he would just be cutting right through it. And these were the forums. And this is not what they looked like in the 1920s. In fact, this is what they looked like during ancient times. And they didn't look that way in the 1920s because during the medieval times, Rome was actually a quarry where they were taking the marble from some of the magnificent forum. You could see how magnificent it looked during ancient Roman times. And during medieval times, they were just destroying them and using the marble to build churches. So, it didn't quite look like this when Mussolini actually looked at it. It was already in a state of disrepair. But these were what the forums looked like, 2,000 years ago. And you could see they're absolutely magnificent. And, a lot of this was destroyed. And this has been a street that Laura and I have spent a lot of time on during the, I would say, a dozen times that we've been in Rome together. And there is a picture of us standing on the Via dei Fori Imperiali, facing the Coliseum. And this is the reverse picture of me facing towards the Palazzo Venezia. And that white structure in the distance is the monument to Victor Emmanuel, who was the person who unified Italy in the 1870s. And a lot of very exciting things kind of happen on that street. There you see a picture of our friend Randy buying a scarf from a street vendor. And she picked up the scarf for €10. And we saw the same scarf a couple of days later for $100 somewhere else. I forgot where Laura said she's going to watch this and say you couldn't remember the location. Where did we see the scarf for $100? I can't tell you, but on the street it was $10, and in a private store it was $100. So people, obviously love this street. Here's the video. There's also street musicians, and this is the video, Ellen, coming up. So when you're ready, let me know.
Okay.
Okay, here it goes.
Nella maniera più assoluta, il mio equipaggio più pronto, a vostra disposizione, per soddisfare qualsiasi richiesta di qualsiasi tipo. Vi ricordiamo che le uscite di sicurezza non ci sono, e allora allacciate le cinture e leggete.
Okay, so, you get street musicians doing their thing. Incidentally, right behind them is the Roman Forum. That railing is separating the person who was singing from the Roman Forum. This is a museum along the street, which is a museum dedicated to the street itself, telling you some of the history that I'm going to be telling you in a few minutes. This is one of the buildings along the street, and you can see there are people, and this part of the street is traffic free, so it's a really nice spot to hang out. There's a really great view. Probably this photo was taken from the top of the Campidoglio, which is at this, at the end of the street that you can't see, but off to the left. The reason I'm showing you this is because this spot over here has a lot of outdoor restaurants. There's one here, there's one there, and there's a couple more out of the distance. And I have eaten in this restaurant. I don't know the name of it, but it's an outdoor restaurant that has, in my opinion, some of the best pizza I've ever eaten in all of Italy. So that's a really great spot. So if you happen to be walking along the Via dei Fori Imperiali, right on that side of the street, I think it borders another street that goes off to the north by the name of the Via Cavour, are a number of very, very nice restaurants that you could take a break from all your sightseeing and stop off there and have a bite to eat. Here's another view of the Via dei Fori Imperiali. And this is what it looks like at night, looking towards the Coliseum. And this is what it looks like at night, looking in the opposite direction towards the Victor Emmanuel Monument, and also off to the extreme right, the Palazzo Venezia. And, the street was created for this purpose. And it was built by Mussolini between 1924 and 1932. The original name that was given by Mussolini on April 19th, 1932, when the street was finally completed, is called the Via dei Imperio. After World War II, the name was changed to the current name, which is the Via dei Fori Imperiali. And the reason that Mussolini created the street was because he wanted Rome to be, and this is a direct quote, "Rome must astonish the peoples of the world." And that was the reason he built it. But, that was the reason he gave. The real reason was so that he could have his grand processions starting at the Coliseum, going all the way down to the Palazzo Venezia, where he would then speak from that amazing balcony overlooking it. So the mayor of the city, whose name right now is Ignazio Marino, would like to get rid of the street. So I don't know how that would happen exactly, because, I don't know how they would go about doing that, because this is like a really major street right in the center of everything. But he would like to get rid of that street. So that's what he's trying to do. I don't know if it'll happen or not. But this is what the street looked like just prior to the excavation that would create the actual street. So what's going on here in this photograph, which is taken before 1924, is the Victor Emmanuel Monument with the various excavations that are going on to try to, get some of the artifacts from the imperial forums. And when Mussolini created the street, he just plowed right through all these excavations. This is another view. You see, this is looking, well, they're actually looking in the same direction. This is another view of what the excavations looked like just before Mussolini began. And when he began to do his work, this is what it wound up looking like. And, you know, this is really, if you think about it, he just, you know, destroyed all of the excavations that were going on in order to create the flat street that eventually became known as the Via dei Fori Imperiali. This is the photo of that, looking from the Victor Emmanuel Monument, looking at the Coliseum. This is another view of what it looked like during those times. These are great photographs of the early part of the 20th century. And this is a photograph that was taken right after the street was opened for the first time. So this is what the street looked like. And it's a little different looking than the way it looks now. I believe they widened the street somewhat, and this is not quite the way it looks. And this is a photograph taken in 1944, I believe, of the American Army when they liberated Rome. And those are, you know, that's the American Army marching down the street. And that's another view taken, I believe, in the 1940s of the street, looking towards the Victor Emmanuel Monument. And, you know, this is what the street is. The street is a way for people to get to one of the great monuments in all of Italy, the Coliseum. And you can see that, you know, there's a pilgrimage of people either going towards it or away from it. And this is what you, of course, get to see when you actually go into the Coliseum and look at it from above. This is a photograph that we took a couple of years ago. And it's, you know, it's quite amazing. You know, you always see the Coliseum from the outside, but this is a good chance to see what it looks like from the inside, which is really amazing. And then, of course, the monument to Victor Emmanuel from the side. And then two photographs. Both of these next two photographs were taken by Frank Pelias, so I want to give him you know, credit for having taken these photos. Really wonderful photos taken from the top of the Victor Emmanuel Monument, looking down at the street. The street you see right there in the foreground. And this really marvelous photograph of Trajan's Market. You see right in front of that is Trajan's Forum, and behind Trajan's Forum is a market that was created with stalls, and this is where the people used to shop, just as, you know, they would today. Trajan's Market. And then, of course, the very, very famous Trajan's Column, which is a column that was erected right on his market, which commemorated all of his famous victories in various wars that were fought when he was a general. And this is a close-up of that. And, you know, it actually, you know, it tells a story. You could see that there's different separations. It goes around in a circle so that it actually tells the story of all of his conquests, some of which are not that great, you know, to recount, because, you know, this is the Roman army basically going all over the ancient world, conquering different peoples. But that story is told on his column, Trajan's Column. This is right at the very tip of the Via dei Fori Imperiali, right by the Palazzo Venezia. This is the Campidoglio, which is a very, very famous piazza in Rome, designed by Michelangelo, I may add. And of course, one of the things you get to see along the street is the Roman Forum, and that's a really great view of it. And I believe this photo was taken from the Campidoglio. And this photo of the Roman Forum was taken, you know, if you walk along the Via dei Fori Imperiali and then walk to right where those musicians were playing that I showed you before. This is the view you get. And what we're looking at now is the Temple of Saturn, or the remains of the Temple of Saturn in the distance there. And once again, the Coliseum with the temple, I believe the Temple of Venus on the right side, at least the columns of the Temple of Venus. An amazing street. And, you know, if you ever go to Rome, this is a street that you will definitely walk up and down many, many times. And that brings us to the end of tonight's show. This will actually be the last show that I will do before the trip that Laura and I will take on Tuesday to Italy. But the next show is going to focus on a show that I put together earlier this year on the Italian Renaissance art at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. And you know, you can't get to Italy all the time, but if you have a craving to see Italian Renaissance art, this is what you would do. You'd go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and I will give you a tour of some of my favorite pieces in the Met and talk a little bit about those pieces. So that brings us to the end of tonight's show. I hope you enjoyed it. My favorite street in Rome. And until next time, buonanotte e buona fortuna.